Welcome to our school-based CVI strategies Safe Passage to School webinar. I have some amazing panelists on that have been doing this work for many years, talking about the different ways that they do this work. Um, Let me just do a couple of housekeeping items before we get into Safe Passage. First, this project is supported by the BJA, Department of Justice, so the findings, opinions, conclusions, recommendations are those of ours and not necessarily reflections of those from the DOJ. So this webinar is going to be about an hour and a half. We're going to go through some housekeeping things. I'm going to quickly define safe passage so that we're all on the same page. I'm then going to turn it over to Melvin, who's going to hold a panel presentation with Terrence and Taco. We'll leave some time for question and answers, and then we'll have some additional opportunities. We'll share some additional opportunities for engagement with TTA resources. So first, wanted to just highlight what is the Safe Passage model, as well as a little bit of the history of Safe Passage. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to turn it over to Melvin, who's going to be the moderator for the panel, who's going to talk about the variations of Safe Passage and how it looks a little bit different in LA versus DC. So first, I want to just provide a couple of definitions. First, this is the evidence-based definition. It says they provide students safe routes to and from school by placing highly visible community members along routes to monitor and assist with students' safe travel. Urban Peace Institute, they provided a best and promising practices resource tool several years ago. They added on to the definition some critical language that relates to community violence intervention. They talk about safe passage being not only making sure we have individuals in those places, but really defining when. So before the beginning of school or after dismissal in communities experiencing high violence or high crime. And I think that's important for this school-based CVI program. When we're talking about, how do schools partner and collaborate with community organizations that are doing community violence intervention work. Many of the partners that you'll hear from today, they are experienced in violence interruption. They're using data as well as relationships to keep students safe coming and going from schools, and schools can play an active role in talking to some of the students, getting some clarifying information about where they don't feel safe coming and going from school. And also there's a lot of data that the schools have. They might be, who's not coming into schools, are those students from particular neighborhoods, and that can help define and place where safe passage programs should be implemented. So a little bit about the history of the Safe Passage program. It was created in the 1970s. Back then, it was more general prevention. So it was rooted in safe routes to school. So major concern was making sure that students walking or biking to school could be safe. And some of these iterations were piloted in the Bronx and Florida. And then I see we have a number of folks from Philadelphia on this webinar. It grew in Philadelphia in the 1990s as part of the Department of Justice Weed and Seed Grant Program, where they were able to engage and support parents and volunteer crime reduction activity to make sure that students coming and going to schools felt safe. There's a number of models of what safe passage looks like. So today we're going to talk about the number of models. So I want you all to think about who in your communities and who in your schools are leaders and can support this work, and what are the resources to support these efforts. So one of the models is called the professional or paraprofessional safe passage model. And this is often administered by the school district. So they will hire and pay. That's a critical term too, making sure that these workers, they are professionals, making sure they are paid, making sure that they are paid to intervene in potentially violent incidences. So there's the trainings include violence reduction strategies, community protocols with students, incident reporting, cultural competency, de-escalation, and youth engagement. There's also the volunteer safe passage model. So this is kind of a little bit of a step down, but it might be helpful for some of your sites. This is similar to the neighborhood watch model where there are community residents, and again, this is often volunteer based, where you have parents, residents, maybe some community business volunteers stationed at predetermined areas of high traffic to monitor and report potentially unsafe incidents to law enforcement or to school personnel. So this might be cases where students are walking past a convenience store where there's a lot of violence that's taking place, or there's a gathering spot of students at a transportation hub, making sure that you have individuals there, making sure that there is safety, and if not, making sure that there's opportunities to engage organizations that can come and intervene in potential acts of violence. There's the collaborative model. This is sometimes funded by the city. This is where cities and community-based partners gather together with resident organization and leaders in those communities experiencing high levels of crime, and they implement a multifaceted approach to ensure student safety going to and from the schools. And again, this is where they're often going to connect with students during school hours, kind of get a sense of, is there something going to be happening on the way home from school today? There might have been a conflict between students in schools, and we want to make sure that on their way home that it doesn't escalate into violence, because we know that things that happen in the schools impact the community, and things that impact, or things that happen in the communities impact schools. And lastly, there's the school-based transformation model. This is similar to the collaborative model, where community partner schools and residents work together to address school culture and environment. So this is often much more focused on schools, like in the schools. So understanding on-campus and community dynamics that fuel violence in and around the schools. Again, so if there are places in the schools where we know violence is taking place, is there an opportunity to work with community partners to place those credible messengers in those places? It could be maybe a gym during sporting activities, or it could be during the lunch hour when students are gathered together. It could be, when students are arriving at school, when a lot of students, might not feel as comfortable being in the same spot. So there are a number of different models that we encourage you all to check out and engage. And we're going to talk a little bit about some opportunities for you to engage both Urban Peace Institute and Alliance of Concerned Men after the panel wraps up around some specialized TA that we'll be offering next year. So with that, I want to turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Melvin Hayward III. Let me get your bio to make sure I do a proper introduction. And again, apologize, my computer doesn't have that right here. Let's see, there we go. All right, so Melvin, as a member of the Urban Peace Academy management team, he's instrumental in bringing community violence intervention training to peacemakers at the local, regional, and national levels. He supports the development of comprehensive training curriculums tailored to the unique needs and challenges of various communities, cities, and organizations. He collaborates closely with subject matter experts and external partners to integrate best practices, evidence-based and data-driven strategies into community violence intervention training content. Melvin brings significant experience from his previous role as a prevention outreach coordinator to the Urban Peace Institute. Melvin has a bachelor's degree in business management from the California State University of Northridge. Melvin, please take it away. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, James. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody on this call. We're excited to be here. So, James, again, just thank you for the opportunity to be here with, two gentlemen who are very seasoned in this work and, pushing efforts across the nation for violence reduction. So, I'll start with some brief introductions. First, I will introduce my colleague, Ben Taco Owens, who is a CVI specialist here at the Urban Peace Institute, but he also wears many different hats. Taco's been doing the work for 25 plus years in our Black and Brown communities here in Los Angeles. And again, he's a very well respected figure here and nationwide when it comes to doing violence prevention work. Taco, do you want to add anything before I introduce Brother Terrence?
No. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here, and thank you, M3, for that great introduction.
Yes, sir. And next is Brother Terrence Staley, who is the Executive Director of Alliance for Concerned Men out in Washington, D.C. And now, me personally, I got connected with Brother Terrence, I want to say a little over a year ago. And the first time I met you was in Chicago. And we got to talk about some of the phenomenal work that you all are doing out there, you and the team, and how you've been able to break it down. And again, very happy to be on this call with you. But Terrence, please feel free to add anything that I may have missed before we begin this conversation.
I appreciate you, Brother Melvin. Peace, everyone. Terrence Staley, humble servant, executive director slash janitor of the Alliance Concerned Men. I'm honored to be in front of you today to assist and be a partner, a thought partner in this process.
All right. So what we'll do is we're going to get started from a UPI lens, talk a little bit about Urban Peace Institute and kind of what Safe Passage looks like here out west in Los Angeles, California. So I'll start briefly. Urban Peace Institute creates community safety and dismantles harmful systems to transform justice and ensure freedom from violence. So we do have three core program areas here at Urban Peace Institute. We have our CVI programming, which consists of our Urban Peace Academy, where we train frontline intervention workers to best practices and standards of community violence intervention work. We do have a training and technical assistance team, which again, we provide strategy assessment, strategy development, but also trainings to whether it's organizations, cities, counties, states, municipalities, a wide range of partners who we engage and interact with. And then lastly, but not least, we have our smart justice, criminal justice reform, also known as justice transformation, who has been doing a lot of good work on our policy and advocacy side, but also some work with our credible messengers who work in the juvenile facilities with the youth. And we can go to the next slide, James. And so when we talk about community violence intervention, and again, tying it into school based safety and also tying it into safe passage, it's a little bit about UPI as well. So we also work to build a community-based safety infrastructure through support for frontline violence intervention agencies. Through capacity building efforts, UPI supports UPI supports agencies to provide non-punitive, community-based services to achieve safety, to reshape the understanding of comprehensive public safety. UPI strengthens community safety through training, development, and advocacy. Like I said, with our three core programs, these are all of the things that we do to promote, violence reduction and making our communities safer. And again, some of our core strategies are just coalition building and development, community violence intervention training and support, like we said, and then implementation of effective community-based violence prevention and intervention strategies. And so, Taco, I want to get into this conversation. So, Los Angeles, just like many other places that are here on this call now, we understand the importance that school plays in the role of violence in our communities, right? One of the big key factors now when we talk about violence is social media. And social media is a youth-led initiative, meaning the youth are primarily on social media um, in all ways, shapes, or form, but they are heightening the level of violence that we're seeing in the community, but also in the schools and also many other factors that take place when we talk about school-based violence, right? So from your perspective, Taco, can you kind of just give us a preface as to when people think about safe passage in schools, or people begin to think about safe passage in schools, what needs to be in place, right? So on here, a couple bullet points. So who needs to be at the table and how do we get them there? What role does the community play in it, the community buy-in, the importance of sustaining funding, and then some expectations and accountability, right? So accountability as individuals, but also accountability on the group mechanism to make sure that everybody's doing what they're saying they're going to be doing in terms of providing safe passage at our schools and around our schools.
Yeah. Before I do, Melvin, I just want to take about 3 seconds and pause as you're showing these children. I'm reminded of the school shooting the other day in Madison, Wisconsin. This so uh, who needs to be at the table? So obviously, when we look at our schools, where they're located, who's attending the schools, the geographical makeup, who's living in the community. Uh, so for the most part, the community needs to be there. Uh, I don't know if I'm losing you. My audio video is messing up. Can you still hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, okay. So the community needs to be on board, and absolutely, yes, we do need to have community leaders. These are the folks who are acclimated to the community, who knows the community, know the children, knows the parents, know the safe zones, those places where it might not be safe. Um, and they're real detailed about the community, the safety routes. A lot of our community leaders are organic to the community, so they kind of know the backstory of those schools. For instance, there's some schools that some communities can't go to, and it's across the street from their house, but right across the street is another neighborhood. They're not welcome. The next generation isn't welcome. So primarily, we start with our community leaders and them kind of navigating through who needs to be there. But we also make sure that these are just volunteers. Most of our community leaders in the CVI Safe Passage space start off as volunteers, but at some point they must be trained professionally. There's some do's and don'ts. There's some things that could jeopardize their safety or their freedom. There's some legal issues there. There's some boundaries there with the school administration, with the law enforcement, and just some community protocols that have to be also considered. And the public sectors, in terms of how do they engage, again, everybody has a role, everybody has a responsibility. Our schools don't have school police anymore. So again, it's incumbent of us, the safe passage workers, the community, um, everyone, all hands on deck to be there to make sure that the children are getting to and from school. A lot of times when we talk about safe passes, it's overlooked that even the routes home, what happened on campus usually spills out off campus and then into the community and can lead to a series of events if we don't have folks who are there.
And so, Taco, again, when we talk about, here in LA, what it looks like, right? It has to be a community-led approach, but also people have to be trained. And it's important that we get the right people on board because everybody cannot do safe passage, especially we've seen, on here in Los Angeles, the important, like he said, of being indigenous to the community, just the effects that it has in terms of being able to provide effective safe passage. But also another thing, Taco, I kind of want you to talk a little more about is about the routes, right? So oftentimes here in Los Angeles, our schools are very close, meaning, a high school may be blocks away from a middle school may be blocks away from an elementary school. And we've seen here times and times again, for example, where, things are happening in the community and high school students are waiting at the middle school student school, waiting to, do whatever the case may be. Um, how have we, from your perspective, how have we been able to get on top of that? And how have we been able to, have that community buy-in and understand that, hey, this isn't just, once area in terms of schools. This is a multi-pronged approach, meaning we have to be set up at every one of these schools. We have to be intentional on how we do it, and we have to have the right people. So from your experience, what are some of the things that we've benefited from or we've been able to get ahead of when we talk about being, having this multi-pronged approach in approaching safe passage in our schools?
Yeah, so the safe passage, when it's coupled with CVI, community violence intervention, we also take into account that there's a prevention format, which generally is for the ages of 8 to 13 years old. Might be elementary, borderline middle school, and the different programs that offer prevention services are generally coupled with those prevention agencies. But yeah, you're right. You might have elementary school, middle school, and a high school. They're not all adjacent to each other. You might have one a couple blocks over, but they're all feeder schools, so to speak. So the elementary school, they graduate, they go to that middle school goes to that high school. And so what we do is we make sure that we cover all three schools and those routes, because it's a different route to go to elementary than it is to go to um, the middle school or the high school. So all of these areas are covered within proximity, because these schools are baked inside the community. It's not that folks are being bussed in or bussed out. They're in the community. When there's violence in the community, unfortunately, a lot of these children has to walk past that crime scene, or maybe it's a candlelight vigil, maybe there's balloons, maybe there's instances where, there's an indication that something took place here very bad. They might have to go through graffiti, um, things like that that could be intimidating or threatening. So yes, it is all hands on deck. It's all schools covered. But also here in Los Angeles, we take into account over the past 5 years, there's been an influx of charter schools. These are kind of like private schools or continuation schools. Some of them even have probation schools. And again, we kind of spread ourselves thin because we want to honor the public schools, the traditional schools, but also because we've had this influx of charter schools in our communities. um, they deserve the luxury of safe passage as well. But we have to, again, sort out the logistics, with the charter schools and with the public schools, the administration, and sometimes that can get tricky. So it's a lot of heavy lifting there, though.
Yeah, and Taco, to this point, so earlier you talked about having professionally trained intervention slash outreach workers here providing safe passage at these schools, on the school grounds, inside the school grounds, whatever the case may be, right? So one, what does that look like in terms of having them trained? What are some of the things that they must be trained on prior to, boarding on, prior to doing safe passage work? And how does it go about in terms of, having expectations and accountability, right? So who all would you say from your perspective, what does that landscape look like as to who's assigning, some of these expectations? How does training go for these individuals that are doing safe passage? And how do you keep these folks accountable and hold them to their word of what they say they will do?
So primarily, it's just like most professions that, and when you're dealing with people, or in particular when you're dealing with children, you have to have a background check. So we do background checks. We want to make sure that the folks who are out there who can do great work, that they can get past a background check. Um, Albeit, again, they're doing great work, but if they have something that indicates that they shouldn't be doing safe passage, then we kind of, steer away from that and probably find them something else to do. But also, it's not just the background check through law enforcement, but also the community background check. Uh, we don't want to just leave the care of our children in the hands of someone who, again, has good intentions, but maybe, let's say, a target themselves. And, they might be on the fence and they, helping children get to school in the morning, and then at nighttime, they're living a different lifestyle and actually could be a contributor to bringing harm to children while they're at work. So those things are important that we do the background check. And then, once that's good, we provide professional training. And again, folks can start off being volunteers, doing great work, don't necessarily have any rules or protocols, but the professionalized safe passage worker will go to a training, do a minimum of 40 hours training. And again, this kind of helps them navigate through the administrative collaborations with the schools, also having an understanding with the community, the safety protocols, and the professional understanding when law enforcement is there. But again, it's an intensive safe passage training, but also a continuum when they having different events, whether it's a football game, whether when school is out, local parks. So there's always this evolving uh, ecosystem that takes place within safe passage, because uh, not only do you provide safe passage, but you're learning um, through engagement what some of these children may need. Some of them may get high on the way to school or from school or whatever. So there's a baked in by default mentoring component there too, that won't allow children to get high or do drugs or do other things that they shouldn't be doing. But it goes beyond just making sure that they get to and from school physically and safety. And that's taught in the professionally trained intervention outreach for safe passage.
No, thank you for laying that out, Taco. So, as we know, doing this work, there's a lot of challenges that come to doing safe passage, whether it's, starting it up, whether it's, getting buy-in from the school. Some of the things that I kind of want to talk about, and James, we can go to the next slide, please. Is some of the things to be aware of, right? So again, that first part is assessing, accessing school leadership. So we've seen oftentimes schools don't want to admit that they have a problem. For some reason, they may feel like it's a personal attack on their school, and multiple other reasons. But some schools just absolutely don't want to admit that there's a problem, whether it's group violence, gang violence, that is taking place in their school grounds, right outside of their school grounds. So how do you go about that, Taco? Navigating and talking to these school officials to let them know, like, hey, we're here to support, we're here to help. But them just refusing to acknowledge that there may be a problem in their school with violence. How do you go about dealing with that?
Yeah, so dealing with the administration, it has been tricky sometimes. We have success when you're dealing with a principal that is aware that the school definitely needs safe passage, could have some challenges, whether on campus or off campus. And a lot of times when we get that resistance, the overall part is the data that shows otherwise. And again, you may have a school that says, hey, we don't need intervention, we don't need safe passage. And then so when we bring the data that shows otherwise, that there's bad things happening within proximity of the school, a lot of violence, and then again, just kind of lay out a treatment plan that has safe passage in there and the success that safe passage brings. But I think overall, the community kind of champions that. When the community wants it, and I don't know a parent that doesn't want their child to be safe going to and from school, but our communities are the biggest supporters, because we're hands-on with the community. It's not like we're strangers. They know who we are, why we're there, and they definitely occasionally have to give the school a nudge and say, hey, we need safe passage at this school for multiple obvious reasons.
And Taco as well. And again, you've been a part of it, seeing how safe passage is played out here in Los Angeles. But the second bullet point talks about sustained funding, right? And oftentimes, still in this work, especially in the original stages here in Los Angeles, a lot of you did this work on a volunteer basis. And I think some of the sentiments that we have seen with certain schools, and again, not all of them, is that you all care about your community so much, you care about the kids so much. We love and value that. Why are you charging us for your services? Right? Why should we have to pay you to help this ecosystem of safety around our schools, within our schools? Because some people just really feel like that you all should be doing it out of the love of your heart, taking the time out of your day to doing this work. What are some of the struggles or some of the challenges that you've seen and had to deal with in terms of like funding, right? So on here talking about school, city, county, private, how that also affects how you do safe passage, and if it does. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen with sustained funding?
Yeah, so I think the key word that you said it is being a volunteer, and in this professional field of work, there's no such thing as a professional volunteer. Um, our safe passage workers provide a great service to the communities, to the schools, um, and so we've gotten beyond that. That's kind of like old news, like, hey, you guys do great work. Well, I mean, why do we need to get funding at this source when we're getting everything for free? But again, I think when we look at the data, when we see safe patches in place, um, violence is down, school attendance is up, folks are graduating, and they're living valuable lives at this point. Sustaining those funds, again, it's a lot of musical chairs. Well, they say, okay, well, we'll pull funding from over here, we'll pull funding from over there, or we just don't have it. Can you guys just continue to volunteer and do it for free? And so we're still to this day really trying to get the city, the county, the schools, the state, even federal government to understand the imperativeness of having funding set aside specifically for safe passage and providing the data that shows the impact that it's having. And I think that might be like one of our challenges, so to speak, is coupling the data with the uh, the funding, or why funding is necessary when we can take this data, present it, and at least get someone in administration to understand that this works. It has a tremendous benefit in this CVI ecosystem, but also in the school administration. There's a benefit there as well. Granted that, again, we don't have school police here anymore, so there's no more school police funding. But again, it's not that we see ourselves as competitors with law enforcement, but we're just presenting a new community public safety narrative to our schools. So yes, funding is challenging. And again, a lot of times there's musical chairs, but we are getting some traction. More data is needed and more comprehensive understanding of what that data brings is also necessary to be brought to the table.
And to piggyback Taco, the one of the last things I want to ask you right now, and you talked about it, right, is it's an alternative strategy to public safety, right? So talking about excuse me, some of the stakeholders that um can be involved in this school-based approach, in this safe passage approach, such as law enforcement, local businesses, CBOs, churches, etc. How do you navigate and manage the different so to say, personalities that they all bring, right? So for example, you have this community led strategy, but law enforcement is like, hey, I want a piece of this. Local businesses like, hey, I've been here for a long time. I want a piece in this. Some faith based organizations, I want a piece of this. This is what I can do. This is what I can do. And some of it may overlap. Some of it may not necessarily be as vital to providing the services of safe passage as they may think. So how do you go about managing these different stakeholders and, like I said, so to say, these different personalities that come when you bring together intervention, prevention, law enforcement, local mom and pop shops, faith-based organizations, and every other place that could potentially play a role when you're building up your safe passage infrastructure? How do you manage that?
Well, I think maybe, perhaps, that it is perceived that safe passage work is easy, and that is a compliment to folks who provide safe passage and community violence outreach work, because they have a specific skill set, talent, and I would even go as far as say anointing that they can do things that others might say, hey, I can do that. Doesn't always work out that way. So yeah, you're right. There's other folks that say, hey, I want in, I can do that. But at the end of the day, if the community isn't saying that, this is the chosen one, these are the folks that we want to provide the services. These are the people that we trust. These are the people that were volunteering. These are the people that we see on a daily basis. These are the people that we can call beyond the 9 to 5. Um, so I think it doesn't necessarily excluding other folks from saying, hey, join the party. But again, primarily the community is more interested in those who are there, not to just earn a dollar or get some buy-in to get a contract, but those who are providing a level of quality service of care. So sometimes there's room at the table for folks to provide other services, but we're here to say that, when we provide a service, it's not a one-stop shop. I mean, we're providing safe passage. If other folks want to provide these other levels of resources that's greatly needed, we support that. But we don't want everyone to think that they can do something that they don't have the capacity to do, and that could be misleading and could actually put folks in harm's way. So it's important that we have that training, we have the buy-in, and we have the support, and we have the collaboration with each and every person at the table, understanding what their roles and responsibilities are.
Yeah, that's like you said, Taco. It's very important that we keep together all of these core elements. And again, the most important part is having those folks that's indigenous to the community, having them trained to be most effective in their safe passage effort. So what I do want to do, and thank you, Taco, for letting us know, what it looks like here in Los Angeles and on the West Coast. We do have Taco's contact information here, his email, and then a QR code to the best and promising practices to address violence and personal safety and safe routes to school programs. And so what I want to do now is pivot, right? So we're able to get the West Coast, the Los Angeles perspective. And now what I want to do is briefly introduce again Terrence from Alliance of Concerned Men, the executive director. And we want to hear about what it looks like for him and his team out of Washington, D.C. So I'll read this briefly. Over the past 3 decades, the Alliance of Concerned Men, ACM, has helped to decrease crime in some of Washington, D.C.'s most dangerous and underserved neighborhoods. ACM has effectively fostered community trust and preemptively addressed local disputes, preventing them from escalating into violence. This proactive engagement has been instrumental in transforming neighborhood dynamics, promoting peace, and enhancing collective security. So, Terrence, out there in Washington, D.C., again, we know it looks similar in certain ways, but there also are some nuanced differences for multiple different reasons, whether it's the geographical location, the type of violence you all are seeing. So when you all approach safe passage and school safety and building out this plan, this to attack, the safe passage model, how do you all start this process, right? So can you just talk about again some of how you identify the schools? How do you identify resources and bring them into the table, and everything else that entails of how you all go about the beginning processes from safe passage?
Yeah, thank you for that. And just listening to Taco, so much expertise in that. I've personally seen the work that him and his team has done, and my hats off to the folks in South LA and Los Angeles as a whole. Um, in the District of Columbia, we are in charge of a community that is located in a specific space in Southeast. And so ACM was granted resources to be able to provide the public safety for the Greenway community, which is an entire community. We are essentially the number one service provider for public safety in the Greenway community. So that law enforcement doesn't have to patrol in that space. And so it's not that we are opposed to law enforcement at all. We work adjacent to law enforcement. Our job is to ensure that we intervene, interrupt, and prevent violence. And if we do our job correctly, God willing, they don't have to come in with their guns and have to have a more aggressive approach. And so when it comes to safe passage was a public safety modality that was needed in order for us to be able to manifest the change that we wanted to see in the Greenway community. And so we did a community assessment. We got with law enforcement. We said, let's do an assessment of where the high violent crime locations are, specifically in the Greenway community. There's 2 schools in Greenway, an elementary school and a middle school. Suzel is the number 2 most dangerous school in the District of Columbia, and it's in middle school. Metal detectors in both for numerous reasons. And so it just turned out that the locations where most of the calls for law enforcement were in and surrounding the school. So the kids were getting out of school, they were fighting down in the steps, they were fighting in the school, and then they would contact their brothers and sisters in the elementary school and have them join in. And so the kids in the elementary school would contact their parents, and then their parents would join in. And so it was an entire gauntlet of violence in and around Sousa Middle School and Kimball Elementary School. So once we found out those safe passage points where the violence were, we immediately dispatched our individuals, violence interrupters, community practitioners, those that are from that specific neighborhood. And I think Brother Taco spoke well about that. You have to use the natural resources in the community. The community has to save itself, right? When we talk about sustainability, that's what it looks like. You utilize the individuals that are victims and perpetrators of violence to be the change agents in their own space, which transfers a culture of violence into a culture of peace, all related to safe passage. And so once we found out those locations, we provided it to the school. We asked for a meeting with both of the principals, the school administration, and with DCPS to present our findings. But before we did that, we got buy-in from the community. We asked the parents, what route do you take your kids to? We found out the safest and the most quickest route they weren't using that we thought because it was unsafe. And so what route is most efficient for you to get your child from your door to the school steps? We did the walk around with them, the preachers, the residential presidents, all the CBOs specifically in that location. We all got on our feet and we walked that safe passage route 5 times together to get a feeling for it. And this was in the summertime. And so we positioned ourselves in the summer, in and around the school, and we found that reception there was not light even to us, even though we're from the community. And so we need to have these folks in this point. We need to have these folks in this point. Now, then it was, how do we get into the schools to have the conversations, to have a safe passage program that the school supports in partnership with the community? And I'm gonna give you an idea of ACM staff. So we have roughly 70 community practitioners, community professionals, and we are 92% returning citizens. So we utilize those natural resources. All of our staff are victims and perpetrators of violence. And so to be able to get our staff into the schools took a little more work. And this was roughly a few years ago, a little more than a few years ago. And DCPS schools was not receptive to the community at that time. And so not only were we trying to get community into the schools, we were getting returning citizens into the schools, i.e. ourselves. And so when we had the meeting, we showed them the statistics, we showed them the details. They were impressed by it, right? We gave a whole PowerPoint, invited them to our office, vice versa, to create that connection. They said, okay, well, who are you going to have in the schools? Well, this is our violence interrupter, Brother Kurt. Brother Kurt is famous in that neighborhood for being the perpetrator of violence. Came back after 13 years. Now we call him the Pied Piper because he's a major change agent in that community. But the school had not understood that yet. And so they said, ACM, I'm sorry, you can't do safe passage. We said, okay, no worries. What we'll do is we'll be a block away just to ensure and show you how we're committed to this work. And so we were a entire block away. The fight started mitigating just because we were in the presence. They knew that we were there. And then the kids gravitated to our safe passage practitioners. And so the school said, okay, well, they have very good relationships. They are who they say they are. They're giving community programming outside the school. So let's let them be on our block now. So now we're right across the street from their safe passage points. And they said, okay, ACM, y'all are doing an amazing job. We have no violence outside now. How about you do our safe passage points? And so that's how we were able to even begin the conversation of safe passage after 2 years of engagement, where we were able to begin the conversation of safe passage. And so we identified the schools and/or schools and how the violence is related to each other. We identified resources for services. And so we utilized our community-based approach through the CVI PI implementation, and we added safe passage to our budget narrative. We didn't go in asking for permission to do this work. We said we're going to do this work because we're committed to our community and we want to see our community be revitalized. And so we added them to our public safety budget so that we can provide that service free of charge. And so that is how we were engaging into the community and we're able to start doing the work through safe passage.
Yeah, and Brother Terrence, what you outlined is a process of, like you said, 2 years to get fully engulfed into it, but also, like you said, what you all did, and what we also see so many other people that do this work because we really want to see our community safer is, okay, if they won't let us in or on the school grounds, we're going to cover the premises like you all did, right? And you said it was that natural gravitation to these folks that are providing safe passage. And oftentimes we see that, right? Because with the schools, whether it's the elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, at the end of the day, kids just want a safe route back home. The parents want to make sure that they get back home safe. School administrators just want to make sure kids are getting home safe. And so having them out there, like you said, just the presence alone does so much, right? So with the presence, but also training folks the right way and training the right people, when you add all of these different elements, it becomes a hyper effective model in a way to really bring down violence in the community, right? So from your lens there at ACM, when you guys first, like once you guys get into the school, what's next, right? Okay, you get into the school, you got an MOU signed or whatever the case may be. Now you got to gather up the right folks, right? Once you gather up the right folks, you got to train and develop them, like Taco said. So can you speak about how do you all develop, the protocols for your workers that are going to be doing safe passage in and around these schools? How do you find the right people, right? Again, you both, talked about it, them being indigenous to the community is key. But we also know that there are a lot of indigenous folks to the community, but they may not be fit for safe passage, right? There's other ways that you can use and utilize them. And again, how do you develop the training plan? Is this something that's a tailored approach for each and every individual? Is this more so a group tailored plan? How do you all go about the process of developing that scope of work, hiring the folks, and then getting them trained to do safe passage in their communities, in the schools that they'll be working in?
So, developing protocol is essential. That's we had to go back to the table and have that PowerPoint once we were able to do safe passage and sit the principal down, the school administration, the school security guard, and their police officer, which they no longer have in the front of the school now because it's not necessary. And so we said, based off of our statistics, that we received from law enforcement, from our own assessment, from the residential presidents, and from the CVOs already working in this space. These are where the safe passage points need to be. It doesn't have to be structurally around the school at different corners and blocks based off of what it looks like, right? We have to do it based off of the statistics. And so that put us in some actual projects and housing developments and stairways and spaces there, because the kids aren't going to fight right in front of the school. They're going to find a place to duck off. And so our protocol was to go into those spaces to bring light back to the safe space. And so the kids continue to convene around the school. So there's control of the kids while they're outside of school. And so we had to get that blessed off by the principal. I remember one of our walkthroughs, and the Principal Green and Souza, she called me. She said, Terrence, y'all looking real sketchy out my back window, because she saw we were in the projects down in the hallway, right? Because that's where they were fighting at, like gladiators. The kids were getting out of school. It is a 2 feet square space that they would trap themselves in, and no one could leave out until they couldn't get up. There was blood, all kind of stuff, right, in that stairwell. But that just speaks to, that's where the violence was happening, and that's where we went, and that's where our safe passage point needed to be. And so instead of having 6 individuals at safe passage points, we had to have 12 initially to get started, just to cover all those areas. And that's just part of the protocol. And of course, protocol outside of training delineates how you engage with youth. Now, all of our youngins, those kids in the school, know our safe passage, professionals. And so they'll walk up, give them a hug, slap 5, do the most. But when they're on the job, that's not their job. Their job is to provide public safety for everyone in that space, and not to single out anyone in that space. So all that touchy-feely engagement is not going to happen while you're on the clock. Now, when you talk to, young man and his family at the house, you can go visit them there. But when you're on the clock, you're entirely professional. And another thing that we did, typically with safe passage, individuals use safe passage vest. We have such control of our community, and this ACM emblem that you see represents public safety more than anything. And so our staff wear our logo instead of the vest, because we don't want to distract any of the youth as if we're not who we say we are, because they know that who we say they are when they come up to us. And then interviewing candidates for the community. So we found that the mom, the grandma that got 4 or 5 kids in the community are some of the best equipped, most trained individuals to be on that safe passage point. All of our safe passage staff members have a child that goes to either 1 or 2 of those schools. When you have a parent that has a child that goes to that school, there's just a different buy-in for safety that they want for their own child, and they'll treat those other children as if they're their child. And so that is one of the qualifications for our heroes and sheroes, right? They must have a child that goes to that school for that specific buy-in. And develop training to plan and hire staff, background checks for sure, as you interact with children, child and family services, and a federal background check. Now, this does not prevent returning citizens from being hired. And I think that should be known. It's just a background check that they have to go to be able to engage with them. And Child and Family Services is the delineating background check that decides whether they can engage with children or not. And so ACM also has our conflict resolution manual that is copywritten in partnership with American University's Department of International Conflict Resolution and Peace. We took crew members, returning citizens, up to American University to the Department of International Conflict Resolution and Peace. We conducted a study with their grad students and manifested the conflict resolution manual that you see today here. And every single one of our staff are trained on that. And to give you an idea of what it takes to be a trainer for this, we had 42 candidates that trained to be trainers for this. And we had 2 out of 42 make it. But the thing is, they come in for training. It takes over 6 months. Even if they don't become training instructors, we send them back home healed from their trauma because they participate. And so the extensive training that they're provided in order to be able to engage with the youth, triggers and suitors, strengths and weaknesses, visible identity, the pieces of identity, the social construct of identity groups. They learn themselves and they resolve trauma. And then looking outward and inward, empathy, understanding, trust, rules for fair fighting, exploring perspectives. And this is the second portion. Our third portion is transforming conflict, active listening, cycle of violence, creative problem solving, difficult conversations. In our next session is restorative justice, the self-compassion pause, peace circles, the upside down of forgiveness maze, appreciation inquiry. They have to go through all of these divisions of self-improvement, reflection, to be able to be the change agents that we need them to be to even do safe passage. And as a standard, ACM requires every single staff member to be trained on this. They may not have to be the trainer, right? But they do have to be trained on this to accept the ACM ideology. We are a thought, not just an organization.
And brother, excuse me, brother Terrence, what I do want to ask, because that conflict resolution manual, laying out the four core elements of it is powerful, right? And making sure again that we have professionally trained individuals out here providing safe passage services to our schools, to the local area, and to the community, right? So from your perspective, again, as you built that out, what were some of the things that went into place again when you're thinking about safe passage and connecting this training to the folks that will be implementing the services? What are some other things that may not have been directly listed as a topic, but are some of the subtopics that you also hit on that are important for people to understand and be equipped with when they're doing safe passages, at the schools?
So safe passage is a public safety modality. So you are able to evolve into other spaces of service provision when it comes to the community and to the schools. If you have a curriculum that trains individuals not just engage, but to be social emotional experts with these youth, the school will then go past safe passage and allow you into the school. So now with our conflict resolution, we are now in both schools providing conflict resolution to the youth that they consider needing additional resources. We specifically ask for the youth that are expelled, suspended, in school detention, social emotional needs, and need assistance with their family. And we have all of those youth on our specific caseload, and we provide conflict resolution in school to them. And then we have a community-based conflict resolution from 5 to 6. So our engagement started with us saying, hey, we just want to be a help to you. We just want to make sure our babies get to and from school safely. We want to make sure that the teachers have space to be able to matriculate our scholars, right? Because that's who they are, to and from the next grade successfully. We want an opportunity to give them conflict resolution so they feel confident that they can be to be the change agent in their own homes. But then also with conflict resolution, we want to have after school programming to assist them with just getting their homework done. And so we encourage everyone to have a curriculum that can be transferable and that's culturally specific to the participants that you serve, so that you're more than just a presence, you're an asset, and you can transform a culture from violence to a culture of peace.
No, thank you for that. And brother Terrence and Taco, what I do want to ask both of you, and again, you all laid out some very key and foundational pieces to building out that safe passage infrastructure, from bringing the right people on to training and developing them, and to, outline the perimeters of where you are going to be at, making a plan of being intentional, connecting with the school staff and the youth. So you guys, like I said, laid out a bunch of key topics and points. But one of the things that we often do in this work is, we look back in hindsight. Oh, wow, if I would have known this then, I would have done it this way, or I would have done it this way or that way, whatever the case may be. So, Taco, I'll start with you. Looking back in hindsight, in terms of safe passage, some of the work that you've been able to be part of implementing, if you had one thing that you would, look back to in terms of when you were building this out that you didn't know in the early stages, what is some advice that you would give to folks that are just building out their CVI safe passage infrastructure that you wish you would have known from the beginning? What is just one piece of advice?
I think one thing would be having the community to understand their level of power and assuring that they were empowered to be able to determine what they feel is community public safety for them, and being able to communicate that through the powers that be. The community is taxpayers. They're taxpayers. So it's their taxpayer dollars, and they should be able to determine where those tax dollars go, and just kind of, communicate that more to the community, and leveraging that as advocacy. Like Brother Terrence said, it's the community that heals and builds itself. But again, in our early stages, we just got out there, we volunteered, we thought it's just a thing to do. But again, we're not just talking about community. There's always this oversight that community is community, but communities are taxpayers, and those taxpayer dollars should be navigated where the community sees where it's best fit to go.
No, thank you for that. And Brother Terrence, same question to you in the sense of, looking back after being able to, successfully implement safe passages into the schools in Southeast DC. What is, one thing, whether it's one piece of advice or one, practical thing that you wish you would have known from the very beginning that may have made this process easier or a bit more efficient?
I think, synonymous with Brother Taco, building more synergy around community-based organizations or just citizens doing the work in that space and getting more of a buy-in for a collaborative effort. We did reach out, but I think that we could have done more to connect with those that are doing the work in that space. We did our best at the time frame that we had to do it when we received resources, but I think that I would have liked to have gotten started earlier, maybe a year ahead, when we first had the thought, and to really do a community research on who's there, why are they there, how long have they been there, who's been doing it, why they're doing it, and then hired them specifically to do the work because they ended up being the employees to do the work anyway. So I think we could have did a deeper dive, probably a year out instead of 6 months.
Yes, sir. And thank you for sharing that. And what I do want to do again, I want to thank both of you gentlemen for again providing a lot of the foundational pieces of how do we implement safe passage programs in our community. But I do want to open it up to Q&A. So the first question that I seen, I believe it was in the chat, and I'll start there and work my way back to the Q&A. The first question, it went back to Taco. I believe this might have been a you question. Why are there no police in the schools? Was that from funding cuts or a philosophical shift?
Yeah, I would say both. This happened roughly 5 years ago, 2020, during the George Floyd protest era, and folks asking for the police to be removed from campuses. There was no need there. They felt that uh, the folks that were being arrested or being dealt with by the police wasn't being handled fairly. And so there was a move to have that funding, which was a total of $21 million, and saying divesting that and invest it into more um, viable approaches, community approaches, not necessarily safe passage, but having counselors and different formats of remedying non-punitive issues, and allowing law enforcement to, free up school police to allow them to do something that's probably, maybe more of along the lines of law enforcement work, and, attending to robberies and burglaries and things like that. And so, yeah, that happened in 2020, and so 2021, they pulled the funding. They invested some of that funding into the Black Student Achievement Fund, where they afforded some programs for mentoring, and some safe passages along those dollars, but the majority of it didn't go to safe passage. But that's one of the reasons why they did it here in Los Angeles. I don't know, Brother Terrence, if they seen something different out on their end.
Yes, I'd say that's the same time, height of the pandemic, when the transition started happening, George Floyd, even we had, our riots here in the district, tore up downtown. And so the community wasn't as receptive to law enforcement because of that. And, our communities were the ones that were hit the hardest. I remember when Unite the Right came, right? We had all this stuff in the district. And, we had a stay-at-home order for those that live in the district. And so the receptiveness to law enforcement at that time was not healthy. And so the District of Columbia did go into another direction by providing community-based organizations the resources they needed to use ingenuity. And I think it's not a misconception that community brings ingenuity and new ideas. We're talking about ecosystems being created. And without community at the table, that is not an ecosystem. Community has brought an ecosystem to law enforcement, municipalities, governments, DA offices, states, countries, right? So by allowing community to the table, we have been able to envision what a public safety ecosystem looks like. Violent crime is down 33% across the nation through the CVI implementation. It provides opportunities like this call here, right, to where practitioners, education professionals, educators, schools, districts, education systems are able to get on a call with community, with law enforcement, with the government, with LISC, and to have educated conversations about new ways of doing things. And not one time have we excluded law enforcement in anything. We've just been brought to the table, and that's a new feeling and it's a new concept. But we are here as community practitioners, and what we consider important is just the same thing as they consider important. We're talking about the revitalization of our communities and better quality of life. And so we are blessed and happy to be at the table now, and we intend to stick around for a bit.
Yeah, thank you
So,
both.
Melvin, I got a footnote to that. So the biggest push that came from removing school police from our schools here in Los Angeles, it wasn't the administration, it wasn't necessarily outside of the community, but it was the students, and the students, black and brown students, have their own orgs already, in particularly in high school. But they kind of championed, like during that George Floyd area, that kind of caught wildfire. And it was the students that, for the most part, pushed to have school police off of campus and redirecting those funds to, I don't know how you say it, but better teachers and better counselors. So even though it was a collective, it was the students that kind of pretty much led that charge. So goes back to what I was saying, that the community having that buy-in and being empowered to determine what they felt is best for themselves and for the community. This particular charge again was led by the students in the county of Los Angeles.
Thank you both for sharing. Gigi, that was a great question. I hope they were able to really answer what you were asking. This next question that we have here is from Brother Malcolm. He says, how are you presenting the safety findings back to the community, getting feedback from them? And was it participatory mapping or something along those lines? So I think, Brother Terrence, that was a question maybe directed at you when you guys were, when you were talking about the foundational pieces of setting it up, that infrastructure.
Yes, so we have a law enforcement liaison, Brother Kev. He was a captain for MPD, retired captain MPD for 30 years in Southeast 60. And so he is our law enforcement liaison. He receives a report from MPD every single week on any violent crime inside the Greenway community, which is attached to the school. And so we get those reports from MPD, through our liaison, and also we get it from the school consistently on a day-to-day basis. So we have direct communication with the principals and also that partnership through our liaison with law enforcement. So we have statistical information as far as the work that we're doing. And an advancement of that, and that's when we first started, we're now conducting studies based off of our conflict resolution in partnership with the elementary schools, utilizing the conflict resolution and seeing the difference in school attendance, behavior, camaraderie with their other students, and their willingness to participate. And so we are consistently finding ways to grade our work, to create new systems and develop different protocols and curriculums in partnership with the school.
Right, thank you for sharing. The next question, and this was a two-parter from Malcolm, a follow-up. How many staff do you have dedicated to safe passage per school? So any one of you all can start that off.
So what we have a protocol of a minimum, and again, it depends on the size of the school. But we generally have 4 staff in the morning with 1 supervisor for 2 hours, and that's from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. And then they come back for when school lets out. Occasionally, they'll stay on campus during lunch. Well, not on campus, but in proximity of the school during lunch. But definitely during the time that they're letting, before they let school out, and remain there for 2 hours and make sure that folks get home safe and kind of navigate through there.
And ours is pretty synonymous with Brother Taco. We have 4 safe passage, 7 to 9. That's a separate team. Then we have another team, our VIs and our outreach workers go into the schools for lunchtime detention in Sousa and Kimball. And then we have our safe passage team come back out from 3 to 4 to let out. And then we have actual after school programming from 3:30 to 4:30. And then from 5 to 6, we have community-based conflict resolution. So we have encapsulated, our youth. We spend 90% of their days, and we're feeding them through this process as we make sure we don't send them home hungry.
Thank you for sharing. And I wanted to open up the space for anybody else that any other questions that they may have for Taco or Terrence. Please feel free to, type it in the chat or put it in the Q&A box.
So, Brother Melvin, as we're waiting for those questions, just want to again just give a shout out to Brother Terrence and ACM. We've been on these platforms many a time in person, through webinars, and it never ceases to amaze me how DC and Los Angeles are what I would like to liken to like sister cities in terms of how we operate and even some of the dynamics of our program. Having the spectrum of across the country, but still operating in a sense to where we're impacting lives on both coasts. Uh, Shout out to everyone else as well that's doing the great work. But again, it just intrigues me every time I hear this brother speak about what they're doing on their end and how much it's similar to what we're doing here in Los Angeles.
Melvin, can I use my moderation or co-moderation privilege to jump in with a practical question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So in some of the schools, oh, we got another question. So I'll do mine quick. In some of our schools, um, one of the questions that we've heard is that principals, teachers, administrators in the schools know that something is going on between students and that it's going to impact the community, and it's probably going to happen right after school. What is the process? And this is for both Ben and Terrence. Like, what is the for Taco and Terrence? What's the process for schools to then connect with your organizations to say, hey, James has been beefing with a couple of these people in school, and we just want to make sure that you all have eyes on James as he's coming home from school, just to make sure that nothing happens in the community.
Yeah, so for those schools that we're already entwined with and we've already established the protocols and what we're doing, we would absolutely get a call. We work together. Um, some of those things, believe it or not, some school administrations may be naive. Our students are very, very clever at keeping secrets and what they don't want folks to know or not know. But at the same time, the beauty of a safe passage worker kind of like has this baked in intuition, like something's not right. And oftentimes the students will confide in a safe passage worker, like, hey, I'm afraid, but this is going to happen. Or someone else will come and say, they're going to get James after school, you know. So we do have that luxury, but our primary protocol, hope and wish is that the administration would reach out to us, let us know what their concerns are, and we'll, you know, provide the necessary services for there. Or if it's something beyond our scope of work where now there's kind of like it may involve law enforcement. I mean, we can only go so far, but we don't we can't solve crimes. We can help prevent them, but we are unarmed, and so we would never tell the school, hey, well, this is this is not a law enforcement issue. We're going to fix it all. They have to be able to determine at what point does those protocols shift, and it's a law enforcement matter and not a safe passage matter.
So did the schools like have a central point of contact? So if I'm, teacher A, do they know already, all right, you need to contact this person who will then contact Taco to let his team know?
Yes, because our safe passage workers are introduced to the school staff. So any teacher, counselor, custodian, anybody that works at the school can identify that safe passage worker or that lead supervisor and reach out to them and let them know their concerns. They don't have to like only call one person. It's any of the folks would suffice in being able to help that school.
Perfect. Thanks, Taco. Looks like we got one other question. Melvin, do you want to jump on that one?
Yep, I can read this question.
All right.
So the next question that we have is what's the biggest source of funding? What the biggest source of funding is for all programs, local, regional, national?
Well, for us, it would be um, the schools itself, which is funded through the county. Uh, we don't have private funding for safe passage work, to my knowledge, for schools. So again, because of the schools are under county, that's where the primary source of funding come from. There's some other opportunities that it may happen from the state, but primarily our schools here are under county jurisdiction and not city.
And so from the district, right now it's through the district, and that is an advancement. When we first started this work, we had to reach out to foundations to begin the work, and we used the foundation money to get federal money for public safety for an entire community. But by us doing that, the district now provides funding for the school engagement with community, but it's not per se safe passage. Safe passage was the vehicle for ACM to show them we do conflict resolution. And so now all the funding goes to conflict resolution inside community engagement and after school programming. And by that engagement, we're able to do safe passage. It's got to be creative.
Yes, sir. And the very last question that we have on here is a two-parter for both of you. Um, have there been any instances of community pushback after the launch of your safe passage initiatives, and how did you deal with that? And then additionally, what is your protocol when a violent situation does occur and cannot be prevented during your safe passage work? So I'll open that to whoever would like to start that.
I would say initially, and out of full transparency, that some of, the pushback was the unprofessionalism of some of our workers. There was other nuances there, but I do want to be transparent and not mislead folks and think that we just hire the right person every time. So we would have, very rarely, but instances where folks operating out of unprofessionalism, not having on a uniform or vest, might even be seen smoking weed. And we would have to terminate that person, but that would be like some of the frustration that a community member might have. And again, we would have to, out of full transparency, say, no, that is not, the staff that we want to have, providing safe passage. This is somebody that's new to the work and also new to the professionalized version of the work. So that's some of the pushback. But once we get past those nuances, most folks, they love the work and they support it. The other question, what was the other question, Melvin?
So the second part to that is what is your protocol when a violent situation does occur and it cannot be prevented during your safe passage work?
So what we've done over the years, because there's always kind of been this ideology, if you provide intervention work or you're CVI, you're responding to everything. And that's not possible because there's something that's going on in the community, but the school has its own merits of having safe passage. If there's something that's going to impact the school in the community and pulls folks away, yes, we're going to respond to it and make every effort that situation, that act of violence doesn't spill over into the school. But by all means, safe passage has its own protocols, and primarily we are focused on the schools and the safety of those schools. Um, so we don't like to necessarily identify a person that's doing safe passage, but they're also being pulled over here to do something else. We have CVI workers, doing the community, the greater outreach stuff, and then safe passage. We want them to primarily focus on the schools. Don't get distracted about what's going on in the community. We got folks over there. However, if whatever's going on in the community is going to impact those schools, then we'll have, the protocol. We're going to huddle and we will devise a deployment plan and respond accordingly.
You want me to wrap it up, Melvin? We
Yeah, I was
good?
gonna say, go ahead, James.
All right, all right. So, first of all, Melvin, thank you for once again a phenomenal job as moderator. Taco, and Terrence. This is the third time we've done it, and I always pick up a lot of gems that you all provide. I want to encourage the folks on this call. We're going to be providing an opportunity for UPI and ACM to do some of this work in your schools. We're going to create a pilot program where we're going to be able to connect them with you to help plan and develop, not necessarily implement yet, because this does take time. As Terrence was talking about, sometimes it's a 2-year process. But what we want to do is be able to provide your community and your schools and your partners some professional input on how to plan and develop a safe passage program for your community. So stay tuned for that. You'll see some links on here right now. I mentioned earlier that we're going to be posting the webinar, the PowerPoint, along with a couple of resource tools on our Stop School Violence page. Ryan has put that in the chat for you, so if you want to just click that link. I know it's a bit of a pain. There's not the ability to cut, copy, and paste, but if you just click on the link, just go to it, bookmark it. That's where the webinar recording will be and the resources. We also have, we work with the CVI Center So you can check out a number of wider range resources around CVI in the community. Just one note, backing up real quick, if you are interested in this specialized support, Ryan's also dropped a TTA request. So just put in the note there that you attended this webinar, you're interested in potentially getting some specialized support from UPI or ACM around the Safe Passage program. So send that out. Ryan and I will get that, and we can reach back out to you. The last thing, not the last thing, but almost the last thing. There's also another great tool. There's community-based violence reduction strategies for schools. It does talk about Safe Passage. Talks about a number of other different types of programs that might be something you all think about. And then lastly, on let's see, the 9th, I think it was, we had a similar webinar focusing on restorative justice RISE program that you can check out by clicking on the QR code. It should also be available on the Stop Specialized resource page. If it's not on there today, it'll be on there tomorrow. If you are interested in that restorative justice specialized support, again, send us a TTA request, and we can reach out to you. So again, thank you all for joining this webinar. Melvin, Taco, Terrence, you all, always provide gems. Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us. And on behalf of the LISC and Safety and Justice team, have a wonderful and safe holidays, and please reach out to us with any questions you have around this topic. Take care, everybody.
Thank you,
Take
Taco.
care, everybody.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.